You, with effect from next month, you are fired. I was so surprised that my eyes almost fell out. You stole money from the company. We have proof, therefore there's no need to refute it. Petty cash was taken out while you were working overtime. I was too shocked to process what President Wilson had said. I don't remember being on security camera film, but it appears that I am. Hold on a second. Petty cash embezzlement? My department is sales, not accounting. That isn't feasible. President Wilson would not listen to my fervent protests. I had a sudden dislike for Sorov Corporation. President Wilson's hard visage softened into a broad smile when I told him I would accept the firing. Oh, really? That is regrettable. We wanted to handle this quietly and avoid calling the authorities because this company is becoming more and more well known. It is truly regrettable to lose someone with your level of talent. It really is a pity, I responded, deciding to give up. All right, good luck, he said, hurriedly exiting the president's office. Mike Moore is my name, and I'm 42 years old. At the mid-sized trading company Sorov Corporation, I oversee sales. I joined this corporation right out of college and got put in the sales division. From elementary school through college, I lived a fairly typical life, not making any waves. On the other hand, my abilities seemed to blossom after I joined the organization. I made a name for myself as a promising new hire in the sales department by achieving top results rapidly. Customers praised me and said I went above and beyond what they expected in every way. I paid close attention to my clients' needs and gave them exactly what they needed in order to satisfy them. And this strategy worked. Acknowledging the potential of empathy as a potent instrument, I consistently prioritized the needs of others in my sales endeavors. My performance was acknowledged by the company 3 years after I joined, and I was promoted to supervisor and assistant manager 4 years later for taking good care of my coworkers. Currently a manager, I'll soon be getting promoted to assistant director. My colleagues looked up to me because of my outgoing personality, and I was respected by them for my quick advancements. As a manager, I still get treated as a friend by my staff. I was content and felt lucky in both the company and my connections. The original president of Sorov Corporation had to abruptly resign one day due to illness. John Wilson, the son of the vice president, became the second president. I felt uncomfortable about Wilson being president since, on the whole, he was reticent and mysterious. But I tried not to think about it too much. I got up from my morning duties a few days after the new president's inauguration ceremony in order to have lunch. At that moment, President Wilson loudly entered the sales section. He gave the underlings a fierce gaze. "Are you all operating as intended? I am your employer. You have no time for breaks." He screamed, "Go out there and make some sales," as the subordinates shrank back. Once more, here we go. President Wilson has taken on an increasingly despotic demeanor since taking office as the second president. He would cry at us to don't slack off if we took a break. He would also yell, "Do your job, you slacker," without any explanation, even when we were at work. He wasn't very conspicuous as vice president, but the staff was startled and alarmed by his abrupt behavior change. The minions, unable to resist, finished their meals and went back to work. I said farewell to President Wilson and made eye contact before heading out of the department. "Which direction are you heading?" he questioned sharply. But I didn't panic. "I'm going to have lunch now. It is now past midday." President Wilson snapped at me, his expression instantly nasty. "Have you heard me say anything? There's no time for breaks, as I mentioned. Forgo lunch and return to your work." I had to reply to the president's irrational demand. "But President Wilson, our productivity will suffer if we don't take breaks. Although I recognize how committed you are to your work, I don't think it's appropriate to make staff put up with that. I've always been the opinionated type. I would argue against anything, no matter who was doing it, if it was unfair." It seemed President Wilson did not share the founding president's opinion of this aspect of me. You're quite bold. You'll be sorry for opposing me. President Wilson gave a loud stomp and left. I was working in my department the following day when I received an unexpected call to the president's office. I was informed by President Wilson, who was smiling, that I had been demoted from manager to assistant manager. Defying me was a mistake. I was hearing things that I couldn't believe. How come? Why? I'm not guilty of anything. President Wilson responded to my demand for an explanation right away, seemingly satisfied. That's because you disobeyed me, as I mentioned earlier. Now return to your job. Wilson dismissively waved his hand. Demoted for a motive so personal? President Wilson stared at me before I could continue my argument. He would simply send me away or demote me again, regardless of what I said. I made the silent decision to go back to my department. A few days later, I heard shouting coming from a corner as I was making my way down the hallway to go make a sales call. I stood back and watched. It was President Wilson who gave the cry. He was lecturing someone in the corridor while yelling at a young guy employee with little care. Uncomfortably, I considered this and looked at the irate employee's face. It was Will Brown, one of my subordinates in the sales department. What is wrong with Will, President Wilson? I moved quickly in between them. President Wilson turned to look at me, irritated. I'm chastising this incompetent worker. He infuriated a customer. Will quickly shook his head. That is untrue. I have no knowledge about it. I wanted to know more about the situation, so I asked each of them. It seems that yesterday, a client received an insulting email from someone, which infuriated them and caused them to cancel a contract. The email was sent from Will's computer and was full of obscenities and rude language. I discovered the email in your sent history, and you can be seen using the computer at that moment on the security camera. You are unquestionably the offender. I'm not really knowledgeable about it. I take it that the email was sent after work hours. That day, I wasn't working late. I felt puzzled and stranded between the two at home. If the accounts they gave did not match, one of them had to be lying. However, Will is a sincere person who doesn't lie, especially not by sending such offensive emails. Thus, President Wilson must be the one who is lying. President Wilson, just have some composure. This was only yesterday, thus a thorough inquiry hasn't been completed yet. Am I correct? First, let's get it thoroughly probed. President Wilson became red with rage at my suggestion. Do you think that I'm lying? I checked it out for myself and saw that it was Will. Reporting this to the executives is not necessary. His outlandish remark made me gasp. This man was using his own judgment alone to treat Will like the guilty party. Determining that he is the culprit is premature. Before passing judgment, let's hear his side of the story and conduct further research. President Wilson suddenly grabbed me by the collar and put pressure on me. You ought to keep an eye on yourself. Are you aware of who I am? The second president is me. What I say is final. President Wilson jerkily took off my collar before making his way away. Ultimately, Will lost his job at the company. I was demoted back to supervisor as well because I disobeyed President Wilson. It was unclear if Will was the true offender. I did discover that President Wilson reprimanded those whom he disapproved of. That such a horrible guy had been elected president broke my heart. President Wilson summoned me back to his office a month later. I discovered him sitting among a group of executives with a somber expression. President Wilson made a severe facial expression and got right to the point as I braced myself for what lay ahead. You're fired, effective next month. I was so surprised that my eyes almost fell out. Even though I prepared myself each time I was called in, it was still unexpected when it really happened. I chose to inquire as to why. You stole money from the company. We have proof, therefore there's no need to refute it. Petty cash was taken out while you were working overtime. I was too shocked to process what President Wilson had said. He said that I was working overtime and that late at night the petty cash was being taken out. I don't remember being on security camera film, but it appears that I am. A moment ago, embezzlement. Not accounting, but the sales department. That isn't feasible. President Wilson would not listen to my fervent protests. It looks like you threatened to steal money from the accounting staff in order to silence them. You seem to have been embezzling for a long time. I had to let out a shout. How? Millions of dollars had reportedly been embezzled over a long period of time. If accurate, this was a serious problem. Naturally, I refuted it and recommended a thorough inquiry. With frustration, President Wilson shook his head. It is pointless to dispute it. Mike, I personally confirmed that it was you. The accounting team stated that you intimidated them, so I had the executives look into it this time. I was unable to comprehend what was going on. They claimed to have credible testimony and evidence, but I had no recollection of any misconduct. I turned to the executives to ask for assistance, but they averted their eyes and wore regretful looks. Their expressions let me realize a very important thing. President Wilson was the source of fear for everyone in the firm. He appeared to have taken pleasure in disciplining any employee he didn't like after demoting me. His actions became more extreme, and even the executives were helpless as a result of the abrupt terminations for dubious grounds, as in Will's case. The executives and accounting staff would follow his orders to lie out of fear. President Wilson could now use falsehoods to fire workers at will. I had a sudden dislike for Sorov Corporation. President Wilson's hard visage softened into a broad smile when I told him I would accept the firing. Oh my goodness, that is regrettable. We wanted to handle this quietly and avoid calling the authorities because this company is becoming more and more well known. It is quite regrettable to lose someone with your level of talent. Most likely, he had no intention of calling the police. Everything was false to get rid of me. I no longer desired any involvement with this organization. I said, deciding to give up, "It's a shame." "Well, take care," he said, smiling as he hurried out of the president's office. I packed up my belongings and departed the company while my confused subordinates looked on. I was lounging around my house a month after I had formally resigned when my phone called. When I saw the number, I knew it was from Sorov Corporation, where I used to work. I immediately answered the phone with a feeling of recognition. President Wilson was the one. "You? Dare you? Is this your way of getting even? What sort of joke is this?" President Wilson was enraged. "What topic are you discussing?" I simply replied, "I haven't done anything," which caused President Wilson to yell even louder. "Avoid acting foolish. You took my clients and ran off with your own business. Return them right away." He gave a fierce snarl. The truth is that I founded my own trading business in the same sector immediately after quitting Sorov Corporation. President Wilson fired me, and I wasted no time in getting ready to launch my own company. After all of that, the paperwork was the only thing left. Ever since I began working with different products in the sales department, I've been interested in launching my own trading business. I thought I could help clients more and make their consumers smile more if I operated under my own policies. A few years prior, I had made the decision to become independent, and I had been easing into it. President Wilson removed the founding president, and I lost my job just when I thought it was appropriate. The time was ideal. The following day, I officially resigned and used up my paid leave before starting my own business. Many others joined me in reaching out to friends and former coworkers who had been wrongfully sacked by President Wilson. Even though it was still a tiny business, we found it to be more than sufficient. We started visiting different clients right away. All of our targets were Sorov Corporation clients. We schedule meetings with these customers and use our sales expertise to create flawless presentations that highlight premium products at reasonable costs. I was well known to several of these clients from my days at Sorov Corporation. Since of that, they soon moved from Sorov Corporation to my business since they trusted me and thought my items were of a high caliber. The number of clients climbed quickly as we repeated this method, and in less than a month, we were able to acquire almost half of Sorov Corporation's clientele. The company is facing severe difficulties as a result of you. We're losing money since we fired you because of how badly we performed. We're also in danger of going bankrupt because you stole more than half of our clientele. What steps will you take to address this? It seems that the day after my departure, the company's performance had already begun to deteriorate. Wilson, the president, believed it would eventually revive, but it never did. The fact that I was gaining clients on a daily basis probably contributed to the sharp decline in new business after my departure. Furthermore, it's likely that President Wilson kept firing staff members he didn't like. The remaining staff members were overworked, which resulted in less productive work and depressed morale from weariness, and the smaller workforce meant less efficiency. That's because you fired me, which is your fault. You lost a talented person like me. By the way, I simply gave the clients better terms than Sorov Corporation. Nothing remains to return. President Wilson's teeth were ground in exasperation. I was also fired for embezzlement, but I found out who the real offender was. President Wilson, you were the one who was genuinely embezzling. President Wilson gave me a cool response when I asked him, saying, "What?" I had trouble accepting that I had been dismissed for embezzlement until lately. When I questioned a few of my former Sorov Corporation subordinates, Will said, "President Wilson is the real culprit." One of the first people to beg to join my new company was Will, who had been sacked by President Wilson, and he has been working very hard ever since. When I questioned Will about the circumstance, he clarified that he had started off at Sorov Corporation as a security guard and had been in touch with them ever since. He received some security camera footage from one of the guards one day. All of President Wilson's transgressions, including the embezzlement incident, were caught on camera. It appears that President Wilson had been engaging in a number of covert transgressions. Following his election as the second president, he intimidated the security personnel by threatening to erase all surveillance film from the past in order to eliminate evidence. President Wilson took great pride in this and proceeded to engage in open misconduct, which included frequent harassment of female staff members, extreme bullying, verbal abuse of staff members, embezzlement, and damaging property when he became irate. He would repeatedly threaten to erase the video that was in front of him from the security personnel. Even more startling, President Wilson was the real culprit behind every scandal he blamed on workers he didn't like. President Wilson was also responsible for the derogatory email sent to a client that resulted in Will's termination. It's not obvious why he went to such pains to frame others, but it was probably just a handy way to fire them. The guards had known this as well. A suspicious guard started copying the film after first being threatened with its deletion. President Wilson carried out his threats as predicted, so the guard feigned to erase the data while securing the duplicates. Will, who had been fired, was subsequently given this copied material with the assurance that it would reveal the truth. After learning this, I was certain that the statistics would provide reliable proof. Will had only kept it hidden until now because he was too scared to report it. But when I told Will, "Let's get back at President Wilson," he got fired up and agreed to help me expose President Wilson. President Wilson was silent when I had done explaining, but I could tell that he was shaking with anxiety. "How do you intend to proceed?" His voice faltering. "Reporting this won't benefit you at all," he questioned. Without hesitation, I said, "It will help me. I shall feel gratified when I bring you down, and I can free the workers who have suffered under you." When I made this very obvious, President Wilson became agitated. "Mike, please relax. Let's have a conversation. What are your desires? Can I purchase the video from you?" Taking deep breaths, he tried to gather himself before making an offer. "I'll pay any amount." He appeared to have a lot of money for a president, or perhaps that was just because he had embezzled it. "Is that money additionally pilfered from the business? Wasn't it more than $1 million? That money belongs to the corporation, regardless of how much you value your company, so it is obviously embezzlement." President Wilson was stunned when I told him this. I appeared to have made my point. To please him, how many lies would it take? Then I informed him that we had further proof in addition to the security film. In reality, I had been surreptitiously filming President Wilson's derogatory remarks for a while. I intended to inform the original president when I made the decision to depart and launch my own business. After all, he had a right to know how his son was mismanaging the business he had founded. Even if the founding president could have been shocked by the facts, President Wilson must have given him a positive report. President Wilson could only be stopped by the founding president. "Hold on, we can discuss this." President Wilson begged frantically, "Don't report it to the police or my father, especially not to my father." When enraged, the founding president was intimidating, but otherwise kind. It was easy to confuse him for someone from the underworld because of his severe manner. In order to become the second president, President Wilson had lied to his father, and he has been acting independently ever since. I was almost proud of his audacious actions. Isn't it your own fault? This would not have occurred if you hadn't fired the vice president through dishonest means. Accept responsibility and deal with the repercussions since you chose to argue with the founding president. President Wilson started to exhibit blatant signs of fear. I don't lament the existing circumstances, but I might not have been fired if I had known sooner that President Wilson's vulnerability was the founding president. I got my business up and running quickly, and I now have President Wilson completely cornered. I made the decision to put President Wilson under further strain. The audio recordings aren't actually just mine. I have recordings from other workers at SOAR Corporation as well as from my previous subordinates. President Wilson gave a pathetic little sigh. I reached out to SOAR Corporation's current staff members and requested information, with the assistance of Will and other former subordinates who are currently employed by my organization. A number of workers came forward and said that, just in case, they had collected audio data. The tapes contained a variety of offensive remarks directed against female employees, verbal abuse, and outright insults. I listened to them for confirmation and was so shocked and stunned that I could barely speak. The staff members kindly sent me the audio data when I requested it to punish President Wilson. I also documented the comments of executives, accounting personnel, and security guards who testified that they had felt threatened by President Wilson. When I pledged to remove President Wilson from office, they were more than happy to assist. It was obvious that everyone wanted to take action because they were unhappy with President Wilson. This demonstrated that President Wilson was without allies. President Wilson started to cry and apologize when I said I would disclose this evidence to the police and the founding president. I made a mistake. I apologized profusely. I became conceited when I was elected president. My goal was to emulate my father's style. He went too far in his attempt to sound honorable. What was the number of persons harmed by President Wilson's actions? He had to give what he'd done some serious thought. I hung up the phone abruptly, telling him to be ready. President Wilson called for a time, but I gave him no attention at all. He eventually gave up and stopped making calls. I brought the problem to the attention of the founding president the following day when he was recovering at home. I was worried that it might be too severe for him, given his condition, but I was wrong. How dare that moron do that? He's disowned. He angrily exclaimed, then said he was sorry and thanked me. The founding president readily agreed when I asked if I could report this to the police and encouraged me to see that President Wilson was held accountable. I filed the charges and sent the police the proof that same day. President Wilson was taken into custody for embezzlement and other related offenses a few days later. Just so you know, following our phone conversation, President Wilson vanished from the corporation and took up residence in a far-off hotel. He must have been afraid of getting in trouble with his father and getting arrested. However, the cops didn't let up. Following their discovery of numerous details from employee interviews, they promptly filed an arrest warrant. After that, they began a thorough search for President Wilson, who had gone missing. It was not long before he was cornered and eventually gave up. Naturally, the episode caused a lot of coverage on television, which resulted in both compensation claims from former employees and lawsuits for damages from clients. SOAR Corporation filed for bankruptcy very fast. President Wilson will go to jail for a while, and when he comes out, he most likely won't have any money left. It was kind of funny to imagine him trying to make ends meet in a dilapidated flat. After that, I put in even more effort to increase sales for my business. We soon expanded into a mid-sized business thanks to our solid reputation. After learning about the rumors, SOAR Corporation's surviving clients moved to my business. Sales thus rose even more, and we were forced to hire a large number of new employees. The majority of the recent hires have previously worked for SOAR Corporation. Many of them actively tried to reconnect with me without my having to reach out to them. "Everyone came because you're the president, Mike," my former subordinate remarked, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly delighted. I have to keep growing the business in order to provide for my former workers. I will not be content with the situation as it is. The next objective is to grow into a significant company. Armed with this resolve, I dashed outdoors to contribute to the sales effort.